The Holy Gospel according to St. John, the 8th chapter. Then Jesus said to the Judeans who had believed in him, "If you continue in my word, you are truly my disciples, and you will know the truth, and the truth will make you free." They answered him, "We are descendants of Abraham and have never been slaves to anyone. What do you mean by saying you will be made free?" Jesus answered them, "Very truly, I tell you, everyone who commits sin is a slave to sin. The slave does not have a permanent place in the household. The Son has a place there forever. So if the Son makes you free, you will be free indeed." This is the gospel of the Lord. Thanks be to God. So when Tim and I learned, it feels like a million years ago, it was really only not that long ago, when Tim and I learned we were going to have a baby born at the end of July. Maybe not my first thought, but probably too soon of a thought for normal people. My first nerdy pastor thought was, oh, good, they will be ready to be baptized by Reformation Day. And because Lutherans, we baptize babies. We'll baptize anyone, but we do baptize babies. And as a pastor, you kind of want to get them in before stranger danger sets in. So about 3 months is a good time. And I was like, yeah, Reformation Day. That's a great day to be baptized. I did think of you and this community who hasn't marked this day maybe with the same intentionality before. I thought it would be a nice way to introduce it to you. And also I could think of no better day for my kid to hear the promises of God spoken to them than a day dedicated to celebrating how God uses the church to proclaim grace. And I had the bishop on the calendar. He was going to come. It was going to be great. All these ideas and dreams of what this day would look like. But like so many ideas and dreams we have all had in this year, how I have had to think of this day and this ritual has necessarily had to change. And I have been really surprised this week at how much I was mourning the loss of that. We've been mourning the loss of so many things. I didn't really think that like some hypothetical baptism that I like had maybe thought about so long ago would even rise to the level of me noticing, but it did. And I did think about doing a Zoom baptism, right? Like in our bathtub or something, right? And that seemed weird. And if you or someone you know want to be baptized on Zoom, that's great. I'm all for it. But for Griffin, for our family, we decided to wait, not do it today. Wait for the day whenever it happens when we can be physically in the same place to have physical water poured over his head and the promises of God spoken to him by the gathered community in a way that he can hold on to tangibly. And as much as I was mourning that, I am okay waiting for that day, having no idea when it might be. Because at the end of the day, I don't believe baptism is a one-way ticket into heaven. I don't think St. Peter is waiting to check baptismal certificates, and if God forbid anything were to happen, Griffin wouldn't be let in without one, right? Like, I don't think that. I don't think God is waiting for water to be poured and certain words to be spoken in order to love Griffin. I think God loved Griffin even before I did. I believe God loved Griffin from the foundations of the earth before time began. God has always known the truth that Griffin and indeed all of humanity are first and foremost beloved children of God. An identity that can't ever be taken away. I don't believe God needs even our religious rituals in order to love us. And that's the truth that sets free. We as human beings love to put up barriers to God's love, right? We love to think that we can somehow earn God's love, that we have to do something in order to get it. Either we think, okay, I have to be a good enough person, do enough right things, and God will love me. We talked about The Good Place last week, and then I started binging it this week. We think about it in a points system sort of way, right? And even if we know enough, like to know that that's not true, we still don't want it to be so easy. So we say, okay, well, maybe you don't have to do the right things, but you probably have to believe the right things and to worship the right way in order for God to love you. But the truth is God's love and grace is there for us unconditionally, no matter what we do, no matter what we say, no matter even what we cognitively believe. This is what the Reformation sought to declare to the world at its best, and I will be the first to admit it wasn't always at its best. But what the reformers 500 years ago and all throughout history have sought is the truth of God's unconditional and everlasting love as embodied in Jesus Christ, who is willing to go all the way to the cross just to prove it. We forget that truth all the time. We deny that truth all the time. We forget how much God has done to show us love and grace and freedom. The line of this gospel reading that always sticks out to me is when the listeners of Jesus say, "We are children of Abraham and have never been enslaved by anyone." Now, when I imagine this scene, I think it probably took every fiber of Jesus's divinity to stop him from saying, "Are you freaking kidding me? Have you forgotten the foundational story of your faith? Remember, you were once slaves in Egypt, and then God came and set you free. And let's be honest, you're not doing so hot with the Roman occupation right now. And not to mention all of the ways you bind yourself to sin on a daily basis. You really think you're free? I don't think so." The people gathered to see Jesus have forgotten their dependence on God's grace and freedom and have convinced themselves that somehow they achieved that freedom all on their own. But the truth is, God has set them free. God has set us free. We are not beholden to sin or to any powers of the world, not because we did it, not because somehow inherently we are free in and of ourselves, but because God has done it. If you're in the anti-racism Facebook group, I've been promoting stuff by Bishop Layla Ortiz recently. She is the bishop of the Metro DC Synod, which is Lutheran for diocese or presbytery or just a geographic area. So the DC area, she's the bishop. And she is, if not the first, I can't remember, she's the first Latina bishop, but she's certainly one of only a few Latina bishops. Bishop Layla was raised in the Pentecostal tradition, and she grew up believing that if she did enough, she could earn God's love, and that was somehow God's plan for her. And somehow she ended up at a Lutheran seminary. She was not intending to be a Lutheran pastor, but I think the Lutheran seminary was just the local seminary. So she ends up there, and she tells a story of a professor who she was really struggling with, a Lutheran professor who kept challenging her, right? Every time she would submit a paper, it would come back just filled with red, no, you think you're doing it on your own again. No, this is not it. No. And they really struggled and fought, and he challenged her theology. And then she tells this story of one day he was lecturing, and he said this sentence, and it changed her life. He said, "When you understand that God chose for you to be saved, and that you did not choose your own salvation, then you'll understand God's amazing grace. You didn't choose it. God did. Nothing we earn, nothing we do earns God's grace. God decided to give it to you from the foundations of the earth. From the beginning of time, God thought of you and claimed you as a beloved child. I hope you hear that truth loudly, unequivocally from me, from this community, and from the church broadly. And where we don't hear that truth, where louder voices distorted and tempt us to forget who we are and whose we are, may the spirit of Reformation take over. May the spirit of Reformation call BS on that. And may it open our hearts and minds to God's grace. That's why baptism is important, not because God needs it, but because we do. We need the reminder that we are God's beloved and that grace is abundant. And while we can't physically be together around a font filled with water, I think we can still remind each other of that fundamental truth. So when we break into small groups in a few minutes, in addition to our normal sharing of highs and lows and any prayer requests, I want you to do an activity first. So homework, if you want. In your group, right, you'll have like 4 or 5, however many. Pick someone to start, and then that person will say directly to someone else in the group name. So Nathan is the first person, so I'm going to use Nathan as an example. That if I'm in the group, I'll start and I'll say, Nathan, you are a beloved child of God, and God always chooses you. And then Nathan will say to someone else in the group, insert name here, you are a beloved child of God, and God always chooses you. And you'll go until everyone in the group has been reminded, especially on this day, that they are named and claimed by God. Because that is the truth that sets us free. Amen.